Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Welcome to Safeguarding Democracy, Stories from the Legal Front Lines, sponsored by the American Bar Association's Criminal Justice Section. Before we begin, I'd like to share some housekeeping information. First, this is not a CLE accredited program. Second, you may submit questions at any time during the program using the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Finally, this program is being recorded and will be available soon hereafter on the ABA YouTube channel. As I mentioned before, my name is Arjun Sethi, and I serve as chair of the Committee on Military Justice and Homeland Security with the Criminal Justice Section. I'm a human rights lawyer, author, and law professor based in DC. It's my honor and pleasure to be in conversation today with Skye Perryman, President and CEO of Democracy Forward, named one of Time Magazine's 2025 100 Most Influential People in the World, as well as the nonprofit Times Influencer of the Year, and one of the most powerful women by Washingtonian Magazine. Skye is the president and CEO of Democracy Forward, a nonpartisan national legal organization that promotes democracy and progress through litigation, regulatory engagement, policy education, and research. Skye is known for developing innovative legal strategies, building unique communities and coalitions, and values-based leadership. Under Skye's leadership, Democracy Forward has played a leading role in protecting the American people from harmful and unlawful federal executive action, including securing a nationwide order, stopping the freeze on federal funding and essential services, blocking the detention of unaccompanied migrant children, opposing executive actions that undermine diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, blocking attempts to withhold federal funds for public schools and direct service providers for survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence, including through the targeting of the American Bar Association, and opposing attempts to politicize our nation's nonpartisan civil service. So first, this is a conversation, Skye, about the rule of law. And so what does the rule of law mean to you, and how does Democracy Forward advocate for it, regardless of who's in power?
Thank you so much for having me here. It's going to be wonderful to be in conversation with you. And just want to say thank you to those that are tuning in and to the American Bar Association for its advocacy for and support for that concept of the rule of law, which I think many people would say it's a word that's used a lot and it's hard to define in many ways. It's not uniformly defined. But to us at Democracy Forward, the rule of law is really about people. And it is about the notion that all people deserve to be able to live in a way where their rights are protected and where they're able to build the lives they want to build and to thrive. And having a set of norms and laws and institutions where their job is to ensure that all people, regardless of whether we agree with those people or like those people or look like those people, but that all people have a set of rights that are theirs and theirs alone. And that when those rights are infringed upon, there is a system where people can go and get the types of relief that they need in order to protect their rights. That's what the rule of law is for us. It is important that it be available to everyone, and we advocate, as does the ABA, for access to the rule of law for all people and for everyone. And at Democracy Forward, of course, this is one of our principal tools: is using the law in order to help people build collective power and to advance rights and democracy for all people. It is important, regardless of what political party is in control of the White House or in control of state governments. And we find that people and communities need to be able to defend their rights in many instances. And in this country, the ability to initiate litigation against your very government is a really critical right that people have, and it's unfortunately becoming so needed in this time. And so that's a lot of the work that we do at Democracy Forward, is helping people be able to use that legal system to access the rule of law in order to protect their rights.
And as you mentioned, I mean, we've really seen the important role that lawyers and judges, some lawyers and judges are very much playing in this moment. Since President Trump took office, Democracy Forward has filed over 100 actions against his administration, including litigation challenging executive orders, policy memos, and various agency actions. Before we discuss a few specific matters, could you just talk a little bit about what it's like to work in this moment?
Well, this is such a moment for the American people and for lawyers and for those of us in our profession. And I have to say, we have such a tremendous team of lawyers and advocates that are supporting our lawyers at Democracy Forward. So, this is an intense moment. It is a moment where many of the tools that we have as lawyers really are the ones that are needed in this time. When the president decides that he's going to shuffle people onto planes in the middle of the night and remove them from the country without any process at all, there's sort of one profession in this country that has the ability to try to stop that, and that's the legal profession and the legal process. And so, this is an intense moment. I think it is a very it's a high stakes moment, and that is not to say that the work of justice has always been urgent, and the injustices that exist in this country and that need to be remedied through the law and our legal process has always been high stakes and incredibly urgent. But in this moment, where we are seeing really an unprecedented attempt by the executive branch to rewrite, in many ways, the way that American democracy functions, to undermine some of those core foundational elements. It is, I think, our team and the lawyers at Democracy Forward and at so many organizations and institutions that are doing this work definitely feel the weight of that responsibility. But it also can be a very satisfying moment. We are a profession that has tools that can help the American people, that can help individual clients and people in communities, but that can also help our country as a whole move out of this place that we're in. And so I think that that in some ways is a very satisfying thing to know. It's a lot of pressure, it's intense, but it's a satisfying thing to know, and a really inspiring time to be able to use the law for what it is meant to do, which is to protect the rights of people. And so I think I speak for the team at Democracy Forward and for so many of the lawyers that are engaged in this work, that it is a mix every day of that intensity and that satisfaction. And then, of course, that dissatisfaction where we have instances where the law has not been able to protect people the way that we would want it to, and where people are getting hurt every day at the hands of their government.
It's been amazing to just witness the growth of Democracy Forward. The number of lawyers, who work at the organization. Thank you for lifting them up. Thank you for all your work. And as you mentioned, we are experiencing a moment where the executive branch is trying to sort of rewrite the rules, and they're doing it really quickly. And so, lawyers are being asked to work very swiftly in this moment, and it's really difficult. So thank you so much. Um, I'd like to focus today's conversation really on three areas: contesting substantive policies, the restoration of protections, and Democracy Forward's work, urging and demanding greater transparency into the actions of the executive branch. Um, on the policy question, in March, Democracy Forward, the ACLU, and ACLU DC filed a legal challenge to stop the administration from invoking the Alien Enemies Act, a rarely used 18th century wartime law to justify mass deportations without due process. A district court granted a TRO, and the circuit court affirmed it. The Supreme Court then weighed in and ruled 5-4 to lift the TRO on procedural grounds, but did affirm that people targeted under the AEA must be given notice and an opportunity to challenge their removal. Could you talk a little bit about the status of the litigation and how the Alien Enemies Act, again, this rarely used 18th century wartime law, is being used by the Trump administration today, if at all?
Yeah, thank you for lifting up this case and our clients in this case, and of course, our wonderful co-counsel of the ACLU and the ACLU of DC that has really just been such a tremendous effort in this case. I mean, let me just start with something that you said because I think it's important that we focus on it. This is a legal conversation. The Alien Enemies Act is a wartime law. It has only been used in the War of 1812, and it was used in the World Wars, and it was used in World War II as the law that was invoked to incarcerate and intern Japanese Americans. And that is a dark spot of the nation's history that judges and Congress and presidents have apologized for in many years since. So I just want to be clear what we're talking about when we talk about the president seeking to invoke this wartime law when, of course, we are not at war. The president and his associates are arguing that there has been some type of invasion or incursion into the United States as a result of immigration patterns. So it's an interesting and has been, you have to stretch to even get, and the courts have found this, you have to sort of stretch to even get to the kind of factual predicates that they're trying to use. This is, we're not at war. We didn't miss that memo, to invoke this act. And I do just want to say that this is an act that when it has been invoked, and particularly in World War II, it was invoked in a way that so many people across ideologies have apologized for and said that it was one of the darker moments of our history. So it's interesting that that is the thing that's rearing its head now. Largely speaking, the Trump administration has been unsuccessful in utilizing the Alien Enemies Act for its purposes. And it hasn't just been the courts in Washington, D.C., but also you've seen the Fifth Circuit recently in a case that the ACLU is litigating. A panel has found that there was no basis for invocation of that act. So I'll just say that courts there have been a little bit of mixed decisions, but in general, courts, including courts that you might not expect, are finding that there's no basis for the invocation of the act. The question, of course, that remains on everyone's mind is how are we going to make sure that people get the due process that they need? And when you ask me about the rule of law, it's interesting when you go back, and I think the ABA has some good resources on this, you find that some of the really early instances of the use of the term rule of law, when you're thinking about the Magna Carta or sort of earlier systems of government, it was all about whether the government can hold you or detain you in some way without process, which is uniformly seen in governments like ours as something that is not permitted under our system of governance. And the Supreme Court, as you mentioned, 9 justices have recently affirmed that, which is an important thing to remember. And so I think that's really where the mix of a lot of this litigation is. There's been a debate about whether some of these cases, like you said, procedurally need to be brought invoking sort of habeas corpus, or whether you can bring them under other legal theories. But I think the real fight right now, and Justice Jackson, I think, has rightfully called it in another context, this catch me if you can justice. I mean, the real urgent, swift fight right now is this is an administration that continues, whether it's invoking the AEA or whether it's through other means, to try to detain or remove people without proper process. And it is really requiring an all hands on deck effort by lawyers at many organizations, at many institutions across this country, day in and day out, day and night, to try to secure that process.
Thanks so much, Skye. My next question concerns something that is very much in the news today, and that is the deployment of the National Guard. So in September, just last month, Democracy Forward submitted an amicus brief supporting the District of Columbia's request for a district court to stop the administration's deployment of the National Guard in DC. The amicus brief that you all submitted calls the DOJ legal opinion that justifies the deployment, quote, dangerously incorrect. Could you talk a little bit about that brief, the reasoning, the status of the case, and any other observations you have about the deployment of the National Guard and the legal reasoning we're seeing across the country?
Yeah, let me start with that question more generally because I think we just saw over the weekend. This is what a timely, I was thinking about you over the weekend. I was like, this is going to be a timely discussion as we've seen the deployments over the weekend. As we all know, as lawyers and really Americans know this, you don't have to be a lawyer to know this. And in a country like the United States, our military is not to be used for domestic purposes. It's not to be used sort of with a civilian type of with a civilian focus. And there has been laws in place since the Civil War to prevent that. We talk about posse comitatus as one of those laws to prevent this use. And this is another place where the administration has really sought to overreach, and I think in some ways potentially try to normalize the something that is not normal in this country and that is really antithetical to American democracy and our system of laws, which is pictures of militarized the sort of military in the streets, so to speak, across the country. Over the weekend, we of course saw a judge that was appointed by President Trump. So I always try to point this out, not for any political purpose, but to say that I do think in this moment we need to lift up the district court judges and the appellate judges. In large part, they're doing what we really expect courts to do, which is they're looking beyond sort of the politics of the moment and what the law is. And so you've seen judges across the board, both in Los Angeles, which is where the first deployment was. We have Oregon now, and then of course there's now a legal fight in Chicago. And so that we will continue to see. And I think we believe the administration is completely wrong on the law here, and that the courts will need to see it that way. And I'll highlight there, just to make sure we're all following this, many of those cases are being brought by the state AGs, the state attorneys generals of the state. So this is an important role for those of you that are either working in AG offices or thinking about that for your careers. And then we've, of course, seen some threats with respect to cities. And in some of those states, the state AG may not be the one to challenge it because they're in states where the state AG may feel more aligned with the administration, what the administration is doing. And so I think we'll soon see people in communities and cities and others have to step in for their rights. So that's sort of going on. Washington, D.C. is another place where, and that's actually where I live, and it's another place where the president has sought to use the National Guard. And in that instance, and the DCAG has brought a case, which is the case that we filed our brief in. But in that instance, the government's making a slightly different argument, which is really trying to double down on the status of the district and somehow saying that the National Guard itself is not really. The National Guard itself somehow has the ability, and posse comitatus doesn't apply because of the district. And so our amicus brief, and I just want to lift up the lawyers that worked on that, Brian Netter, Bradley Gerard, and some other folks on our team, really takes this argument and takes apart this Office of Legal Counsel opinion that we do believe is dangerously incorrect. And you have a National Guard here that is controlled by the president, and that is seeking to make moves in Washington, D.C. And so this is a bit of a different legal argument in terms of some of the areas there because of the status of Washington, D.C. And we're trying to make sure that it's clear that people in this country, regardless of where they live, are entitled to the protections that we know against militarized and militarization. And so that the brief walks through that beautifully. It's not available on the Democracy Forward website for those that are interested in digging into that opinion.
I would encourage everyone who wants to learn more about Democracy Forward or even just the rule of law in this moment to check out Democracy Forward's website. It is an extraordinary resource. The website walks you through the various litigation, the various challenges, gives the latest on the cases. The pleadings are accessible. So thank you very much for that invitation. And thank you again for lifting up the work of your wonderful colleagues.
Yeah, and again, like this is a place where there's some sort of argument that somehow the National Guard doesn't constitute part of the Army, and so that's when it's in Washington. And I think our brief really explains it well, and we're really focused on following this case and supporting the case that the DCAG brought in any way possible, because it is those of us that are living it and seeing it every day in the various cities across the country where you have this overreach. It's really affecting people and communities. This is beyond a headline. It's beyond sort of, yeah. So I think, so thank you for asking about that.
Yeah, and absolutely, it's every day. I live in DC as well, and Amtrak, Union Station, certain neighborhoods, they've become a staple presence
Yeah,
there.
many of us, we're raising kids, supporting communities in the district, and this is what cities that, this is what we're seeing in other cities as well. So I want to lift that up. But I think it's really important. There's so many long-standing justice issues in Washington D.C., and I'm really proud of our team for being part of this effort to explain where where the government has gotten it wrong in terms of its view here.
Thank you. Moving on to restoration of protections, by way of example, DHS announced in May that it would not abolish the offices for civil rights and civil liberties, the Citizenship and Immigration Services Ombudsman, and the Immigration Detention Ombudsman after Democracy Forward, the RFK Center for Human Rights, and Public Citizen Litigation Group filed a suit challenging their proposed abolition. Can you discuss that litigation and that successful outcome?
Yeah, this is something we want everybody to focus on. It's hard when you're seeing the headlines every day and we're experiencing the harm that people are and the terror that people are every day. But I will say that there's a number of cases where we are litigating, where our partners are litigating, where we've been able to secure really good early results, not just from the courts themselves, but also from the government. Because when you push and say, we're going to call you on this, in many instances, the government really can't justify what it's done. And so this is among those examples. It was among one of the earlier examples. So I want to call that out. And then the second thing I'll say before we get into the substance of the case is this is also an example of a case that came to us because of needs on the ground. We started hearing from communities that were really concerned about what would happen, particularly advocates that work in the immigration space, that were concerned about what would happen if this Office of Civil Rights, which is an office that is supposed to investigate abuses at DHS. It's really important for immigration advocates, for immigrants, for a range of individuals across the country, not just immigrants that have or may have business before DHS. So we heard about this organically as a concern. And I just want to also give voice to that we want you all, if you're tuning in, if you're hearing about needs, reach out. So because we do listen, we need to know where the needs are. So this case, I mean, the government really, the administration had no legal basis for seeking to eliminate this office. And so a number of the claims that we've been bringing, both in this case and in other cases, involve the Administrative Procedure Act, which is, of course, the Congress's protection, since the early 1900s against arbitrary and capricious government, against the government acting in unlawful ways and operating without sort of congressional authority. So there were a range of claims made in that case, but that's fundamentally what the government did here, the administration did in trying to eliminate this office, was to act without any authority and to act in a way that was unlawful and arbitrary. And so we were able to bring this big coalition case with great litigating partners at RFK and at Public Citizen, and then our team at Democracy Forward. And yes, I mean, the latest in the case is we were able to secure at least an agreement that while the litigation was pending, the office would not go away. And so we view that as successful. And then, of course, we continue to fight in these cases every day to make sure that we'll prevail legally, finally, at the end of the case.
Thanks so much. And again, thank you for the invitation, to our audience today, to reach out to Democracy Forward, right? If there are issues they are spotting, if they need support, because some of these folks may very much be on the front lines and may be witnessing and experiencing things, that require
And
litigation.
this is something we heard this from lawyers, right? This is lawyers that that use this Office of Civil Rights that knew this was going to be a problem. So please do reach out. There's various ways on our website, but info@democracyforward.org is an easy an easy email to email, but also my email is open and is on the website, and you're happy to reach out to me directly and I can get you to the right place. And then of course, following our social channels and things to stay engaged. But I do want to lift that up because we can only do, and we and our partners can only do the work that we hear about. And sometimes this was not a front page of the headline
Yeah.
thing because this administration does so much in this shock and awe to try to hide some of these things that are
Mhm.
also very, very important, but that don't always reach the headline. So that's where we do have to hear from people in communities so that we know where we should be focusing.
And I can attest to the fact that Skye's email is open because I emailed Skye a month ago inviting her to this conversation. And yeah, there was a response. So thank you
We
for
appreciate the invitation, but also please, yeah, we believe in this moment, community is really important and coming together is really important. There's a lot of things out there to try to prevent people from doing that. And we've really made an investment at Democracy Forward to try to be as accessible as possible. So, sometimes we get a lot of bad mail. So be sure to give us
yeah.
the good mail too and tell us where you want us to go.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Is there other litigation seeking to keep offices and programs designed for protecting civil rights that you'd like to discuss and highlight today?
I think just a few things. I mean, we're representing one of the commissioners that was improperly fired from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC. But we also are representing law students. There's some information about this on the Democracy Forward website. The administration, in seeking to get law firms to do its bidding, has made some data requests of firms around seeking individualized and personal data regarding their summer programs, and so we are challenging that policy. It's a challenge to the EEOC, and we're doing it on behalf of brave law students that have come forward in that case. So I wanted to highlight and lift that up. We are doing some work on behalf of federal employees and federal employees that have worked on diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility issues as part of their career, nonpartisan jobs that were then improperly targeted by the administration for termination. And then just to lift up, and we have a lot of examples of this, so I'm not going to go over every win, but the administration really, is attacking education and schools, educational institutions, colleges, and universities. And we litigated and won a summary judgment blocking this so-called Dear Colleague letter out of the Department of Education, which essentially would have deprived educational institutions of federal funding if they did not align with the president's view of civil rights. And we've been able to block that. There are some other cases that were also filed that have been successful in earlier stages that I want to lift up. The NAACP, LDF filed a case. We represent the American Federation of Teachers. The ACLU had a case. So this has been a big team effort, but there have been some wins in the civil rights context. And in part because I think so much of what the president is seeking to do now is not just an affront to civil rights. It's also an affront to the First Amendment, right? Trying to control to align and to sort of try to control people, to force people to adopt a particular ideology around many of these justice-based issues, and that is unconstitutional for many reasons. But it's going to be a fight, and a lot of the things this administration has done are seeking to deeply decimate the civil rights infrastructure in this country. And so that's going to be the work for us as lawyers. It's going to be the work for this generation, for future generations. It's going to be a multi-generational effort, not only to achieve civil rights in this country, true civil rights and true democracy, but also to have to try to gain back some of these hard-earned gains that have really been thrown in the balance. But we're so grateful to get to do this work. And like I said, there have been some wins we want to be sure to lift up in addition to some of the disappointments.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the words that really comes to mind is dismantling, right?
Yes.
Gains, right, that we thought we had secured, that we thought were securely and safely institutionalized.
Yes.
are being undone, and in some cases being dismantled.
Right.
Um, and so it very well it's going to potentially take some time and be a multi-generational effort to regain some of that institutionalization. And it's incumbent on all of us. And it's also great to hear about all the work that you are doing in coalition with organizations like we've heard today about the ACLU, ACLU DC, Public Citizen Interest Law Group, the RFK Center for Human Rights. And so that's also really good to see.
NAACP, LDF. I mean,
Yeah.
there's so many
Yeah.
great organizations that are doing the work in this time and having to continue to do the other work that we were
Yeah.
all very busy
I
with
know.
because these fights have long existed in many states and
Yeah.
communities across the country. We don't want to forget that too.
Yeah. Absolutely. Um, I want to encourage folks to use the Q&A. We'll be getting to the Q&A section of the conversation probably in about 10 minutes or so. And so feel free to use that to ask questions, for Skye. Moving on to the issue of transparency. In 2017, the Washington Post adopted, quote, "Democracy dies in darkness" as its first ever slogan. Fast forward to today, and Democracy Forward has filed FOIA requests and demanded greater transparency on an immense breadth of issues, ranging from DOJ's efforts to eliminate civil service and equity programs to the Epstein files. Um, and so the floor is yours to discuss some of these transparency efforts and why they are so critical in this moment.
Well, it was like Justice Louis Brandeis would say that sunlight is the best disinfectant. And I want to say this before we get into the Freedom of Information Act and some of these particular cases. We've really seen that in this moment. The vast majority of the American people may have some disagreements about things. They may view things differently or have different backgrounds, but the vast majority of the American people largely reject extremism. It is why when Project 2025 came out, you saw that it became a political hot potato. I mean, the president himself couldn't say that he wanted to adopt it on the campaign trail because when you polled people about the policies that underlied that document, it was deeply unpopular among people that were more conservative, people that were more liberal, people that were independent. And we've seen this even with the JGG case that I mentioned that we have with the ACLU on the removal of people from this country without process. We've seen that the court system and the ability to get in court and to expose what is happening and then to hear the stories of people it's a disinfectant. It actually has exposed what is happening to a way in which you have people who might not have been aligned on every immigration policy or may not see things the same way, all uniformly saying this has gone too far. You've seen the likes of Joe Rogan even saying that
Yeah.
in relation to our case. So when I wanted to start with that sunlight as a disinfectant to say in this moment where we really have to use every lever of power that our democracy provides people in this moment to push back and to demand more and to stand up for our rights and for these basic principles, sometimes even exposing what is happening is really like the critical step because once people see it, there is just no tolerance for it. We saw that with the FCC and Jimmy Kimmel recently. We've seen that on, like I said, with removals from the country without due process. That's a hopeful thing, by the way, that people, when they see this, have concern. We've seen it with family separation in the last administration. It was in the last Trump administration, we're seeing that again. So some of this is really about exposure. And there are two ways that we are really looking to make sure that people are understanding what's going on with their government and then are empowered to have the ability to ask and demand better of their government, ask questions, important questions, and then use their voices and their votes. One of those is through tried and true litigation. So this is not through the Freedom of Information Act. This is through telling the stories of people through the litigation that we bring. And in a very saturated media environment, sometimes filing litigation and people reading about the litigation is the way that things move through. It is not clear to me that there would have been the outrage that we have seen with the invocation of the Alien Enemies Act, if we were not able to get into court at 1 a.m. that weekend in March to expose what was happening in real time, and then a judge ruled, and then the administration didn't follow the judge's order and didn't turn planes around, and the American people then, because of that litigation, were able to see through exposure what their government was doing, causing people of all political ideologies to start asking really important questions. We right now are in a case where we have secured in a separate case the release of the agreement between the United States and El Salvador, or certain key terms of that agreement. We have procured that and been able to release that, has become public through litigation. And so that's one really important piece of this, is being able to make sure that we're using cases in this media environment. A reporter told me the other day, he said, Skye, used to, I felt like the lawyers went to the press stories to find things. But he said, now I find myself rifling through all the declarations and all that factual work that the lawyers are doing in the cases to find what's happening. And that's a way that the law is now in some ways on a more of a leading edge because of the fractured media environment and the lack of investigative journalism. So that's a really important. I want to draw that out. Then we have this law that was, of course, passed in the Vietnam War era, where people had a lot of questions about what their government was doing, called the Freedom of Information Act request, and President Johnson reluctantly signed it. And it's a law there that is meant to help people have trust in their government through ensuring that the people get to know what their government is doing. And at Democracy Forward, we have filed a number, over 1,500 Freedom of Information Act requests. We are litigating many of those requests. If the government doesn't respond promptly, we can go into court, and a court can force the government to respond. And that effort is really important. We just saw testimony yesterday. There are questions about whether officials of the United States government took bags of cash in exchange for, doing work that is not the work of the people. And the government's not being forthcoming about that. And so there is a lever of power that people have, which is to request information, go to court if the government doesn't respond promptly, to force that information out. And we believe that's so important to the ability of people to make up their own minds, to understand what kind of questions they want to ask of their government. How are they, going to hold their government accountable? We need people to have that information. It's also important long term if we want people to ever have trust in laws and institutions in our government and our society. That sunlight is going to be the thing that can build trust, because it's transparency. And that's actually why, of course, the law ever existed in the first place, is when there was such rightful deep distrust of what the government was doing in an earlier era. And being able to request information, get information, can really help. So we have a very active, robust, we have tremendous lawyers and research analysts that are doing this work every day on Freedom of Information Act. And then I also didn't want us to forget that just our tried and true litigation on other claims has also led us to be able to uncover things that the people wouldn't otherwise know, and wouldn't be able to hold their government accountable if it weren't for the litigation.
Storytelling has always been a really important part of litigation. And when you think about how much both misinformation and disinformation there is today, it makes sense, right? That journalists and others are now actually combing through pleadings and looking to lawyers to be truth tellers, especially in a moment like this. And it makes sense, right? That transparency and sunlight can be infectious, and it can spur some of that community organizing and mobilization that you talked about from the very beginning of our conversation today. Just to wrap up, and again, we're going to get to questions in a minute, so please, folks, do use the Q&A. And you've already touched on this, Skye, but I want to kind of name it pointedly. We've got law students, young lawyers, seasoned lawyers joining us today. How can they support and contribute to the work and the movement that you've discussed today?
Well, we need your help. So there's lots of ways to do that. I mean, one is if you're able to do legal work that is engaged in the effort to help individuals defend their rights and hold their government accountable, we need you doing that legal work. Some of that legal work is paid, some of that legal work is pro bono. At Democracy Forward, all of the work we do free of charge to our clients, but we also understand there's some smaller firms that are doing some of this work. They have to be paid a bit to do that, but it's important that this work happens. So if you can do the work of holding the government accountable through your legal practice, please reach out if you don't know how to get involved. And we can, we can connect you with clients that probably need your assistance. We can put you to co-counsel on cases. You can email at info@democracy4.org. We work with over 700 organizations that are bringing cases and supporting this movement across the country. In the last 250 days, there have been more than 500 lawsuits that have had to be filed against the administration, not because people like filing lawsuits against the administration, but because of what we've seen with the violation of people's rights. And so we need lawyers to do that. So reach out to get engaged there. I will also just highlight through our Civil Service Strong program at Democracy Forward, which is civilservicestrong.org. We've been able to support an effort called the Rise Up Legal Defense Network, which is helping public servants. So if large scale impact litigation is not something that's your cup of tea, but you think that you could help a public servant or a civil servant access some of the resources they need, you can sign up to be a volunteer through that. And we can, of course, direct you to other places as well. But more broadly, I think it's really important. And I'm not just saying this because I'm on an American Bar Association webinar, because I'll tell you, I gave a talk the other day and I said it and someone came up to me and said, we didn't even ask you to say that. And you said it. We need you to get active in the ABA, but we also need you to get active in your local bar associations. Our professional ethics and the work that the legal profession is doing in this time, it is truly world-changing work. It is essential, and we need, and our profession is under attack. It is under attack by the president right now. It is under attack by sort of far right movements that are offended by the notion that everyone should be able to access justice. And so you don't have to engage in some sort of heroic litigation at the Supreme Court to get engaged. And I just want to say the American Bar Association has been unwavering in its principled commitment that all of us need to heed, to defend the rule of law, to abide by our professional ethics. And we want to be sure that we're sort of supporting that. So there's lots of ways. That is not hyperbole. We need everybody. I'm even thinking about ways like we need to really support the legal profession across the board because of the attacks that we're seeing. And then for students, I would just say there's so much opportunity now, but just understand you're in a moment where you're getting to learn the law as it's happening, and so we need you to focus and be really excellent, because we're going to need so many lawyers and people committed to justice over the long haul to be involved, not just in this fight right now for the rights of people when they're deeply under attack, but also in what what we can do in the future to truly achieve a democracy that is meant to hold all of us. How are we going to not just rebuild, but reimagine civil rights, infrastructure, all of that? So those are some things, and please get in touch. We've got lots of ways folks can plug in.
Thanks so much, Skye. And it really takes a movement and an ecosystem, to create change and sustain it, especially in this moment. So thank you for that reminder. Thank you also to your team. They've been a pleasure to collaborate with in the run up to this conversation. Thank you to Patrice Payne at the American Bar Association, who's a miracle worker when it comes to these conversations. Sarah Tomoto, who helped with the marketing. And so thank you also to everyone, who joined today. I want to go ahead and jump to questions because they are coming in. First, in a time of political polarization, how do we restore trust in the legal system? Or has that trust already been lost?
Well, look, I think that this is a system, first of all, our government generally outside the legal system, and then the legal system generally. It's a system that has not delivered for people in a way it needs to. And I think we need to be able to say that. Certainly, the law and litigation right now is one of the major levers that people have to defend some of their rights. But this is a system that has deep inequities and has not delivered for people. And I think that's what you see with some communities that are distrustful, people that find themselves distrustful, people that don't find a plea to please save our democracy persuasive because from their vantage point, this is something where they haven't maybe seen the government deliver as it needs to deliver for them and for their communities. And so I believe that this is our work. This is our work in this moment. The legal profession has the ability right now, and it's doing it to really show what can happen when it works for everyone and when people are able to access the courts, and how we need a justice system that will deliver that justice. And when we have the sting of injustice, like what we see with shadow docket decisions at the Supreme Court, where decisions are being made without any explanation at all that affect, hundreds of millions of people across the country, this is that moment for us to not settle and for us to say we're going to be involved in building and rebuilding systems of justice in this country that do serve everyone. So I don't think we make excuses for things that aren't delivering. I think we can call it like we see it. But I also think this is a moment that we can use some of the systems that we still have in place for the betterment of people in order to try to defend their rights. And that in doing that work, in doing and walking that walk, as opposed to just talking that talk, there are some opportunities to start rebuilding trust.
I appreciate the question. I appreciate the answer. So much of what we're seeing in this moment, and it didn't happen overnight, is a crisis in legitimacy, right? Our institutions are perceived by lots of people to be illegitimate for some of the reasons you've described, and thank you for shedding light on ways we can potentially, rehabilitate and burnish.
And instead of defending things that may not need a defense, let's be involved in making them the institutions that are meant to hold all of us. Many of these institutions, they weren't created to hold so
Right.
many of us. And so this is a moment we can do that, I think. And I think we need to get out of a defensive posture and get into a, offensive, let's do the work, let's roll up our sleeves.
Yeah. Yeah. Another question. This is something that I know a lot of folks have been thinking about. What role do you think lawyers and legal institutions should play when elected officials challenge or ignore court rulings?
Well, this is a five alarm fire, and we're dealing with it in so many of our cases right now. It is imperative that lawyers be willing, if you're litigating a case, it is imperative that you be willing on behalf of your client to push that case. And if the government or any party, but the government is not complying with your court orders, you've got to be aggressive about forcing that compliance. We are doing that at Democracy Forward. We win court orders, and then we immediately have to request status conferences from the court. We immediately have to put the pressure on to make sure that we are going to ensure compliance. I think we have such a reputation for that now. Sometimes we get preemptive emails that says like, "Don't worry, we're going to comply with this," but we've got to be aggressive around that. And it's a hard thing to do because we are taught in law school. I mean, you could go your entire legal profession with maybe
Yeah.
one case where a party doesn't comply with an order, and now this is a everyday question. So I just want to encourage the lawyers out there. We got to those the rules of civil procedure, the laws that exist around these issues. They exist for a reason, and we've got to push there. For elected officials, we really need our elected officials in other branches of government to do the work they're supposed to be doing. It should be of deep concern to Congress that you have a president that in a Department of Justice is operating in ways right now where court orders are being, are being treated as if they're suggestions. But we haven't seen that leadership yet. We haven't seen that push from the majority of elected officials at the federal level, and we need to be demanding that they do that. I will say, in the big bill that passed, there at one point was a provision that was going to be in that federal legislation that would have weakened the ability of the courts to enforce their orders against the president, against the government, and that was taken out of the bill at sort of a parliamentarian stage. So I'm not suggesting that people are doing nothing, but I do think that it's a fair question. We need to be, regardless of who our elected leader is, what letter is behind their name. There should be no tolerance for an administration that believes it's above the law. And I think that there's some real opportunity for leadership in this moment.
Thanks so much. So there are a few questions specifically about opportunities for engagement for both international and non-US lawyers based in the United States, but also international non-US lawyers who are abroad, watching with great concern what's happening here. Any ideas for them?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, first of all, I think the ABA has a lot of ways to engage, and we are happy to hear from you about, if there are opportunities that might fit in the sort of direct litigation space. Truly happy to hear from you. But I think this is a really important, and it's not surprising to me. And thank you for all the questions. This is a global issue. I do a lot of talks about how the fight for democracy is a kitchen table issue. It's at our front door. What's happening at your school? What's happening in your community? 100%. It is a local fight with global implications. And so, I've been encouraging US lawyers and US trained lawyers to look to international, also to look to international resources in terms of studying, how has the legal profession showed up or not showed up in countries that have faced similar challenges. What can we learn from that? What can we learn from the international human rights context? So I think there's a lot of opportunity for collaboration, for learning from each other, and I think there's a number of opportunities through the ABA. And then, of course, happy to hear from anyone that wants to reach out to us about ways to plug in.
Great. I actually just got a question. Are there any international organizations or resources or tools that are kind of contextualizing the ways in which, democracy is under assault, worldwide that you can mention? Because you're right, it is a kitchen table conversation.
Yeah, I think there are some great resources. Some that I will call out um, is there have been a number of reports by the Carnegie Institute, and then there's some reports at Brookings that are talking about the broader, the backsliding of democracy, the fact that in 2021 the United States ended up on the list of global backsliding democracies, remained on that list ever since. There's a lot of analysis around that, but those analyses also show what is happening globally. In 2025, this is the first year that the number of countries that are in a more autocratic state are outnumbering the number of democracies. And of course, we've been seeing that trend build for some time, but we're really at this critical moment globally. The international, let me just find this name. There's also a great report that I would refer you to Carnegie and Brookings, and then also would say the international idea. So it's idea.int. They're the ones that do a lot of the analyses around backsliding democracies, where various nations are. At Democracy Forward, so much of our strategies were informed by the conclusion that they reached in 2021 after January 6th, that the US was in a backslide. And it wasn't just because of January 6th that they reached that conclusion. There's a levels of analysis, and then some of those follow-on reports. But that, we really started looking at what those root causes were and how could we use some of the tools we have to address those, which was the work that we were doing and scaling, and why I think in this moment people have seen us a lot, because so much of what we're seeing in 2025 is an outgrowth of what we saw in the years that were leading up to it. So I would just refer you there, and then also refer you to all of these organizations. I think ABA is a great one, that are really in this time. We're building bigger communities, bigger tents, and we're happy to also connect with you at Democracy Forward.
Thanks so much. So just the last question for today, and this is something you've mentioned, but maybe it's an opportunity to more sort of explicitly name it. Given what we've seen under the current administration, should Congress take steps to rein in certain presidential powers to prevent potential overreach, and or place additional limits on executive power?
I mean, look, I'm just going to say that the president is exceeding the president is exceeding his power under settled law. And so I'll just say that, like, you shouldn't need new laws to have to, we have laws, he is breaking them. We have constitutional protections, he's exceeding them, but we have an imperfect system of enforcing all of that. And so this is a moment where Congress needs to do everything it can possibly do. And it is a moment that if we do not make it out of this moment, in with an ability to build a democracy in this country, it is going to be at the feet of Congress and the Supreme Court, in addition to the executive branch. And so we do need to be encouraging Congress to do what lawyers and judges across this country are doing every single day, which is everything they can. And I think that you see in this, we're speaking today, I know this is going to be recorded, but this is in the middle of, the government shutdown, where you do see some congressional leaders, I think, really laying down the line. But the problem that we've seen is that no one that's allied with the president has been willing to have those hard conversations and to break with the president. And so we're going to need to continue to demand more of our elected representatives, and to ask questions. And we saw this with some people, at least spoke out against the FCC. Some of the president's allies spoke out against what happened with the FCC, but that's a little too late. And we need to be seeing this across the board. And so, yes, we do need Congress to take a range of actions. And at the same time, this president is violating existing law, and we need to work every single day to try to defend against that, which is, of course, what we're doing in the courts, what the courts are trying to do. So I think there's just a number. It's a all hands on deck.
Thank you so much. The ABA is committed to the rule of law. We know Democracy Forward's committed to the rule of law. I imagine the folks who joined us today feel similarly. It's been a pleasure to be in conversation with you. Thank you again for your work. Thank you to your team. Thank you to the ABA for making space for this conversation. And again, thank you to everyone who took time out of their busy day and an otherwise very difficult moment to join us for this conversation. It will be available on the ABA YouTube channel. And with that, I will go ahead and wrap up today's conversation. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Skye.